A particular vocal sound can be heard in a large number of UK top 40 chart hits from the past 5 to 10 years. Although difficult to define by genre, this sound is associated with a highly commercialised global brand of pop music, which draws on EDM and R&B influences and combines synthesized instrumental backing tracks with complex lead vocal arrangements that undergo a large quantity of both corrective and creative digital processing. This paper develops a methodology for explaining how these vocals are produced, using a combination of ethnography and music analysis methods. Over the past year, I have been undertaking ethnographic fieldwork focused on UK-based songwriter-producers who create these kinds of vocals. This has, firstly, demonstrated the complexity of vocal production techniques in this music, but it has also highlighted how songwriter-producers' individual positions within the songwriting industry have a strong influence on the vocal production process. I argue that combining ethnographic material with a detailed analytical approach to vocal production can help disentangle this complex relationship between technology, the songwriting industry, and the way these vocals sound. I will draw on 2 case studies from my ethnography to provide a preliminary sketch of what such a combined methodology might entail, and I aim to demonstrate how music analysis and ethnography can mutually inform one another. Studying the relationship between vocal production techniques and vocal sounds entails looking closely at the relationship between technology and musical aesthetics. Scholars working in STS have pioneered the study of specific music technologies, and many scholars working in musicology and popular music studies have focused on the aesthetic qualities of popular music in a way that is sensitive to its technological modes of production. However, there is still more scope for methods to be developed which pay due attention to the complexities of both sides of this relationship. Such methods have been most fully elaborated by ethnomusicologists who take ethnographic approaches to music production in the recording studio. My methodological aims are most aligned with Elliot Bates, who argues for the combination of an anthropologically informed approach to ethnography with music analysis methods that incorporate the tools and discourse of music production. As Bates has argued in his studies of Istanbul recording studios, this combined method is useful because ethnography provides rich contextual data about the way music is conceptualized, and this can inform music analysis, which interprets such data more closely. Ethnography involves long-term immersion in a key field site, throughout which interviews and observation are employed to gather a variety of qualitative data about social life. The aim is to become intimately familiar with the discourse of the field site, to learn the language, as it were. In the case of popular music production, ethnographic data illuminates a kind of local or situated music theory, which is constituted by discourse about technology, and this can be used to analyse the music more closely. Music analysis is somewhat more difficult to define, given its disciplinary origins in the study of Western classical music, but its general aim is to zone in on the aesthetic details of musical sound, and, to borrow terms from Ian Bent, it attempts to prise apart the internal structures of music, focusing on their constitutive elements and investigating the relative functions of those elements. Most importantly, analysis can happen within the language and conceptual system underpinning how this music is produced. My research therefore builds on Bates's work, contributing to the development of a music theoretical language for popular music production, specifically the production of the singing voice. My focus on vocal production as a whole also expands existing work, exploring individual vocal processing technologies such as pitch correction. Further, however, I show how music analysis can feed back into ethnography by nuancing interpretations of ethnographic data. In this case, I focus on how the details of songwriter-producers' vocal production techniques add further layers of complexity to my interpretation of their industry roles. With this in mind, I will now explain how I combine the 2 methods. Over the past year, I have been conducting ethnography focused on songwriter-producers mixing vocals in the commercial genre that I describe. I have conducted more than 30 formal interviews a much larger number of informal chats and email conversations, and 15 intensive observation sessions of vocal recording and mixing. Initial interviews usually focus on individual approaches to vocal production. I find out the kinds of plugins used, the order in which they are used, and the reasoning behind these approaches. Then, during further interviews and observation, I collect data pertaining to individual tracks, including audio recordings, DAW session files, screenshots, and videos of mixing. This data has provided me with insights into the way songwriter-producers theorize the vocals they produce. In mixing, a sequence of different software plugins are applied to the vocal cumulatively and iteratively in a vocal chain. The individual plugins used will vary according to personal taste, but a conventional chain for a lead vocal usually includes reverb, compression, limiting, EQ, tuning, and de-essing, as well as perhaps distortion or saturation. It also includes more manual, labour-intensive modifications made to the voice, such as comping, timing, and more fine-tuned pitch correction. The use of a vocal chain conceives of the voice holistically in terms of its overall sound or tone, and the way a cumulative sequence of modifications shapes this sound. This informs the kind of music theoretical language I engage when analysing this music. I also incorporate visual representations of sound drawn from the software used, including DAW and plugin interfaces, and I provide transcriptions in Western staff notation for ease of transmission. Then, I focus the bulk of my analysis on individual vocal phrases, demonstrating how songwriter-producers make different modifications to a phrase over the course of a mixing session, and considering how such modifications are interrelated. In the interests of keeping my paper brief, here I focus particularly on comping and tuning, as these processes usually take up most of the time spent mixing a vocal, and they also require the least technical explanation. I've explained how ethnography can inform music analysis, but analysis can also deepen interpretations of ethnographic material. Here, my analysis builds on a key theme drawn from my ethnography, concerning the complex labour processes involved in contemporary songwriting. In this genre, the roles of production and songwriting are nearly always collaborative rather than individualised, and songwriter-producers straddle these two roles. In many cases, the labour of vocal production will be performed by several people in different stages, including the initial work done by these songwriter-producers and a vocalist, later transformations by other producers or artists to whom the track may be sold, and numerous mixing and mastering stages. Vocal production is therefore at the heart of this process, as the vocal is what defines a song in the early stages of production. This is evidenced by the fact that songwriter-producers spend a disproportionate amount of time working on vocals compared to backing tracks. Consequently, for the songwriter-producers I focus on here, what constitutes a polished vocal sound is always informed by the different ways they are situated within this complex labour process. I show this in the following case studies, which analyse how songwriter-producers take subtly different approaches to vocal production according to their different industry roles. These two case studies focus on the vocal mixing techniques of two songwriter-producers I've worked with, Jason and Chris. I've chosen these two for comparison because although they both work in the same commercial genre that I describe, the way they are situated within the wider industry of commercial pop songwriting differs in important ways. This has audible consequences for the way they approach vocal production because they are thinking differently about what a successful and profitable vocal ought to sound like. Firstly, Jason's work is firmly situated in this commercial genre, which he describes as top 40 pop. His work is part of a complex chain of labour geared towards the production of hits. He writes his own songs, hires top liners to sing the vocal parts, and then pitches these as demos to hire players in the industry, such as more well-established producers, artists, or DJs. If Jason's pitch is successful, the buyer will perform their own edits to the song, and Jason will get a cut of the earnings and some credits when it's released. My analysis shows how Jason exaggerates certain timbral aspects of the voice in an attempt to make his demo more noticeable within this commercial production chain. In contrast, Chris works on a smaller scale, usually writing songs in close collaboration with individual artists, then mixing them for the artists to release. Although Chris's work in the commercial genre is his main source of income, he also works on projects in a more indie genre where he takes a more dominant artistic role, and he sees these projects as more aligned with his own aesthetic. My analysis shows how Chris's more artistic, collaborative, independent mode of production is reflected in the way he tries to innovate within established commercial vocal production trends to establish his own sense of aesthetic individualism. Analysing Chris and Jason's vocal production in more detail therefore provides a complex interpretation of these different industry situations, demonstrating how ethnography and music analysis can mutually inform one another. Each case study focuses on an audio clip from a song by each songwriter-producer, and these are included at the link below. I encourage you to pause this video and listen to the examples now. Jason's approach to vocal production in this example is characterized by his goal to pitch the song to a successful EDM pop artist. He describes this artist as a cool EDM person. This intention leads him to exaggerate specific timbral characteristics of the lead vocal in an attempt to get his demo noticed. He zones in on particular aspects of the voice that he perceives as idiosyncratic and attention-grabbing, whilst also remaining within this artist's cool, dance-infused pop aesthetic. This is illustrated by two things. Firstly, he exaggerates a prominent inhalation sound that the vocalist makes throughout the song. And secondly, he uses pitch correction to create contrasting vocal timbres within phrases. This prominent inhalation sound can be heard on the lyrics "Don't lie, don't lie," which mark the end of the song's chorus. After the last word of this phrase, the vocalist inhales suddenly. This breath is so loud that it creates a discernible pitched vocalization falling on the beat. When comping, Jason focused on exaggerating this effect, occasionally isolating this breathing sound to purposefully choose takes where it was loudest and most clearly pitched. This effect occurs firstly on the hook earlier in the chorus, although I'm unable to include this in my audio example as the song has not yet been released. The resulting sound is striking because it is as if the vocalist is using too much air, almost hyperventilating, and this is unique in the context of most of Jason's other work in Top 40 Pop, which tends to minimize the audibility of breathing sounds. Clearly, Jason has isolated this heavy breathing effect as something that he wants to turn into a notable feature of the song in an attempt to make his demo stand out to the artist he's pitching to. Jason also tunes this phrase to exaggerate similarly attention-grabbing timbral features. He uses pitch correction in a way that modifies the pitch and timbre of the voice simultaneously. And in this case, he tuned each iteration of "Don't lie" differently to create contrasting timbres within the phrase. To do this, Jason uses Auto-Tune Pro in graphical mode, which represents the voice as a series of pitch curves which can be manually adjusted. For the first "Don't lie," Jason manipulated the curve to exaggerate the vocalist's oscillation in pitch on the word "lie." In contrast, on the second lyric, Jason uses Auto-Tune's note function on the word "lie." This function allows the user to draw a rectangular box around a portion of the curve, which automatically tunes the voice closer to the target pitch. This means that on the first iteration, the vocalist's oscillation is exaggerated, whereas on the second iteration, there is less oscillation, and the transition between the two notes is more abrupt. In crude terms, the first iteration wobbles and slides between the notes, whereas the second iteration is straighter. This kind of precise work on individual vocal phrases represents Jason trying to exaggerate noticeable disjunctures and inconsistencies within the vocal timbre for dramatic effect. In general, then, Jason's uses of comping and tuning to exaggerate timbral features give the vocal an idiosyncratic sound that is an attempt to grab the attention of the EDM pop artist he is pitching to. This analysis therefore shows how Jason's role within a commercial pop supply chain guides the kinds of decisions he makes about how to manipulate vocal sounds during production. In contrast, Chris's approach to vocal production shows how his role as a producer-songwriter straddling commercial and indie genres results in a tendency to try and innovate within his more commercial work. This is demonstrated by the way he uses cutting and fading within a vocal arrangement to support his interpretation of song lyrics. Throughout interviews and observation, Chris repeatedly stressed his desire for size, energy, and thickness in a vocal arrangement, which is achieved by gradually building up a large quantity of doubles, harmonies, and counter melodies, otherwise known collectively as backing vocals or BVs. This approach to vocal arrangement is common in this genre because it is one tactic for reinforcing the vocal's dominance in a mix. The BVs, especially the doubles, remain at a quiet volume and are intended to blend in and add texture to the lead vocal, rather than sounding as separate vocal parts. Chris applies a standard vocal chain to tidy up this arrangement, including the usual comping, compression, EQ tuning, and timing. But Chris also describes how, after having undertaken these standard steps, he tries to get a bit more creative with the sound by manipulating the vocal in precise ways. This involves using comping and fading to emphasize or support the lyrics and melody of the song. For example, Chris took a precise approach to editing the gaps between vocal phrases. The vocal arrangement at this point is conventional, consisting of a lead vocal which dominates, 6 doubles in the same octave and 2 in the lower octave, and 1 or 2 harmonies. In the process of tidying up this arrangement, Chris painstakingly cut out the portions of audio in between vocal phrases and faded the beginnings and ends of each group of BVs. This fading is unique, however, because it is specifically tailored to the melodic contour of individual vocal phrases. For phrases in the chorus that end with a descending contour, Chris applies long curved fades, and the phrases with an ascending contour instead end with a short diagonal fade. Chris said that this is intended to match the natural inflection of the voice. This is because the chorus's hook, "Fall in love with someone new," falls on phrases 1 and 3, and the curved fade makes the end of the hook sound louder for longer, whereas the second phrase is made to sound slightly more abrupt in contrast. The effect of this precise work is that the BVs follow the melodic, rhythmic, and timbral contours of the lead vocal as precisely as possible, and Chris describes this as a way of maintaining the natural breathing of the voice. Despite this idea of maintaining natural breathing, in the same set of phrases, Chris also completely removes breaths to generate lyrical impact. When timing the lead vocal, Chris decided to cut out every breath which follows the first statement of the hook, "Fall in love with someone new." This is because, and I quote, "by omitting the breath, it gives the feeling that the phrase is definitive, like it's an order." Omitting the breath provides a sudden contrast to previous phrases, and Chris argues that this marks the phrase as important and imperative. Beyond this lyrical interpretation, the removal of the breath also shows how Chris's ideals of maintaining natural breathing and inflection don't necessarily refer to physical aspects of singing. Instead, they are more metaphoric, encapsulating an idea of the BVs and the lead functioning together as an integrated unit. This analysis therefore demonstrates how Chris's work as a songwriter-producer straddling commercial and indie aesthetics prompts him to try and innovate within vocal arrangement conventions. Chris engages with conventionalized vocal arrangement techniques which are concerned with making the vocal as loud and powerful as possible. But he also takes an innovative approach to cutting and fading this arrangement in ways which scaffold his interpretation of the lyrics. This is a strategy for trying to maintain his own sense of artistry whilst working in a genre which he sees as less artistically rewarding. Beyond illustrating the complexities in Chris's industry role, this analysis also exposes the unstable foundations of the concept of vocal naturalness. Further music analysis could more fully unravel this term and the role it plays in Chris's collaborative production style. To summarise, I have argued that an effective combination of ethnography and music analysis involves using ethnographic material to contextualize a kind of local music theory, which can then inform close analytical work. My ethnography provides a kind of music theory that songwriter producers use in vocal production, revolving around a vocal chain and a holistic approach to achieving the right vocal tone or sound. Finally, closer analysis shows how vocal production plays out differently in two different case studies, where songwriter producers' different roles within a complex songwriting industry inform their approaches. Most importantly, this analysis nuances interpretations of these industry roles, and therefore shows how combining ethnography and music analysis can help to disentangle complex relationships between technology, the songwriting industry, and the way these vocals sound. Thank you for listening.